Okay, well, I am supposedly live. See about that. Okay. All right. Can everyone hear me? If you can, post something in the chat so I can see. All right. Good. Good. That's wonderful. So basically what I'm going to talk about tonight is this is just a really completely impromptu live stream that I'm doing. And the theory is that I'm going to tell you about some of the finer points of using Windows and just some general system administration related to that. And I'm not quite flying by the seat of my pants, but I'm kind of ad-libbing a lot. So I'm going to try to keep this relatively short so that I'm not really wasting your time. My theory is that you probably are able to figure out, if I just tell you what's possible, kind of show you some stuff, you'll be able to extrapolate from there, do a little bit of Google searching. Because the thing is, I'll show you something and you'll probably forget the exact way that I was doing it. So you'll have to Google it anyway. So basically what I'm trying to do tonight is I'm trying to show you, here's some stuff you can do with Windows that you probably didn't know about. So now that you know that it's possible, if you actually end up needing to do it eventually, then you know that you can at least Google it and find out how to do it. You can also kind of experiment around a little bit if you want to. So the first thing I'm going to say is, before you do anything that I'm going to show you, you might want to think about backing up your files, because essentially anytime you're messing around with your computer and you haven't backed up your files, you're kind of asking to lose your data. So you might not have any data you want to lose. That's fine. Hopefully you don't lose passwords and stuff like that, but you just want to make sure that any important data that you don't want to lose is backed up. So that's the first thing you want to think about. And you also want to, if you have software that requires serial numbers or product keys, you want to make sure you have that backed up in case you need to reinstall and so forth. Now the stuff that I'm going to show you probably won't, it probably won't break your computer, but anytime you're messing around with the registry or anything like that, you just want to think about that. So before I go into anything else, I'm going to just kind of give you a really quick 1-minute history of Windows. Basically, when it was originally released as Windows 1.0 back in the 80s, you started an operating system called DOS, and then you booted Windows from that. And essentially the command prompt is the modern version of DOS, but now the roles are inverted. Now the command prompt runs on Windows instead of the other way around. And eventually, originally when you plugged in hardware into your computer, you had to manually install a driver for everything. So if you plugged in a printer, you had to install a driver. If you plugged in an external hard drive, you had to install a driver, and and so forth and so on. And then eventually, slowly with Windows 95, 98, and so forth, Microsoft added something called it's not autoplay, plug and play, where basically the drivers get installed automatically for you. So that was one important development. Another important development around 2000 when they released Windows ME was System Restore. I don't know if you've ever needed to use it, but System Restore is pretty useful. I haven't used this with Windows 10. Some of the stuff I'm telling you about is kind of stuff from Windows 7 and earlier, but System Restore does exist. Wait a minute. All right, so let's create a restore point. So this is, you can make a restore point and you can restore your computer to a previous place in time. So if I wanted to, I could say system restore, and I hope it will pull this up. Yep, here it goes. And then I can choose a restore point, and I can restore my computer to that, and it'll get rid of any software I've installed since then, and other stuff. So that can be kind of useful. So that was another important development. And around 2006, AMD introduced 64-bit processors. So that's why you'll see there are two different program files directories on your computer. That's because program files x86 is for 32-bit software, and regular program files is for 64-bit software. And then the only other really important recent development for our purposes is that Microsoft is getting rid of Control Panel. So you're probably just used to going to Settings and customizing your computer there. It used to be you would go to something called Control Panel, which was a lot clunkier, but at this point still has functionality that has not been moved to Settings. Microsoft is slowly getting rid of stuff from here and moving it over to Settings, but they haven't done everything yet. And I have, normally you'll see Control Panel look like this. I have changed the view to large icons so you can see all the individual stuff here. So I'm not going to talk about everything that's here in Control Panel. The main thing you want to know about is administrative tools, because there's some advanced stuff you can do in here that you might not have known about. So there's the firewall is here. Task Scheduler allows you to automatically run a program at certain times if you want to. Services is an interesting program. This lets you see all the services that are running in the background. A service is basically a program that starts when your computer starts running, and it's always running in the background while your computer is on. And so you can stop and restart these. So for example, the print spooler, if you stop this, you won't be able to print anymore until you restart it. And there are some other things like plug and play. This is what I was talking about 2 minutes ago, where you can automatically install drivers for new hardware. If you stop this, that's not going to happen anymore. So that's all I'll say about services. It's just useful to know about. Registry editor we'll talk about in a minute. Event viewer is really interesting. Event viewer basically keeps track of stuff that's happening on your computer. So there are a couple of different logs here. The system log is the main one. Let me filter the log, and I'm going to do critical and error. So you can see like whatever errors have been happening and critical stuff. So it seems that my computer turned off without cleanly shutting down. So there's a message about that. So that's from kernel power. So that's a lot of stuff gets logged here in Event Viewer. And computer management kind of contains a couple of these things together. So it's tasks, it's scheduler, Event Viewer, and so forth. Other stuff in Control Panel. Let's see. There's the firewall. Various other stuff, power options, but a lot of this stuff has already been moved to settings. So much for Control Panel. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is file system structure. So let's see here. So generally with any Windows installation, there will be the program files directories and the Windows directory. And you probably already have messed around in program files. So inside Windows, the main folder you want to know about is System32. There's lots of stuff in here. And again, I'm not going to really talk about all the details of this stuff in here. If you need to mess around with any of it, you can Google it. But the one interesting folder you might want to know about, even if you don't do a lot of printing, is the spool directory. So all of the print drivers are stored in here. And this folder contains current print jobs. So you can mess around here if you need to delete a job that's stuck. The other thing about this folder is there are a bunch of Control Panel like applets that are in here. So if I search for .msc inside Windows, it will pull up stuff from administrative tools and other things as well. So let me scroll down. I saw. All right, I guess I'm just going to have to wait for this to finish searching. The really cool one is group policy. That's gpedit. And you can do interesting tweaks in here. So if you want to, say, disable something in control panel, you can do that here. You can force a specific start background. See if I can find something more interesting. Yeah, you can customize stuff in the start menu. This is really useful for administrative purposes if you want to disable stuff so that users can't mess around with it. You might have seen these sort of things enabled on library computers. Here's a task scheduler again. Here's the event viewer, computer management. There are a couple other things here that you probably won't find just by browsing through your computer. It's kind of hidden for some odd reason. This L user manager thing, this is really useful. This is how you create local users without using a Microsoft account. You can create them from here. Otherwise, you're going to have to make a new Microsoft account in a lot of cases when you make a new user, which is really annoying. They didn't used to require you to do that. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is the registry editor, which you can get to by typing regedit in the start menu. And I'm afraid the font size is going to be a little small, but I guess that, it is what it is. So there are all these, there are 5 major keys here that you see to the right. There's HTTP classes root, there's current user, local machine, users, and current config. Under HT classes root, a lot of this stuff is file extensions. So you'll scroll down through here and you'll see a lot of stuff about file extensions. Local machine is useful because there's stuff about software that's stored in here. So if you go to HT local machine and software, you'll see stuff organized by the manufacturer. So for example, you have Microsoft here. And I could scroll down and find, say, here's Microsoft Office, version 16, and various stuff is under here. And you're probably not going to need to go browsing for this. The main time you'd have to mess with this is if you're troubleshooting some problem, but it's kind of useful to know that this exists. The purpose of the registry is to store settings for your computer. The other interesting thing under Microsoft is Windows. So there's both Windows and Windows NT, and I think Windows NT has more useful stuff under it. So there's current version, and you can see there's a lot of Windows settings under here. Profile list here, this is all the users that are on the computer. So it lists my home directory. If I were to delete this, it would have to recreate my user profile. Current user is stuff just for the current user, and you can see that there's stuff here. And for the most part, you're probably not going to find yourself browsing through this. The one interesting hack you might want to know about is you can search the registry. So I can do find. And if you ever want to get rid of a particularly pesky program, or if you want to reinstall a 30-day demo and have the demo period reset, or any other cool stuff like that, what you can do is you can just search, and then you can search for the manufacturer name. So if I wanted to get rid of, let's see, I have a couple of JetBrains IDs, so I could search for JetBrains. And essentially what you do is you just delete every key that you come up with for that manufacturer name. So I just click delete and I say I want to delete it. Normally you don't want to delete stuff unless you know what you're doing, but if you're just deleting stuff from some third-party, non-Microsoft manufacturer, you're probably going to be fine. And so then you just keep searching through the registry and deleting those keys, and eventually, not in every case, but in a lot of cases, and then once you delete the files as well, the software won't remember that it was ever installed in your computer. And so that's kind of a useful hack to have. The other thing about the registry, and I just closed it, but sometimes if you're dealing with a nasty virus infection, you might need to mess around in the registry. But normally you can just use a tool like Malwarebytes or Microsoft Safety Scanner to get rid of viruses. The thing about viruses, though, is generally if you get anything other than a very mild infection, you probably want to reinstall your operating system. That being said, there are a couple interesting things you can do. One is you can go to Windows Safe Mode, and I'm not going to do that because I would lose my stream, but essentially safe mode is a actually, let me pull it up in Google. Safe mode is basically you're booting Windows without a lot of services and drivers running. So that's something that you can do if you're having trouble with a driver crashing, or maybe your computer's not booting properly. If you boot your computer into safe mode, then you can bypass some of those problems and actually start your computer. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is networking. And networking is a bit complicated, but essentially, let me pull up Notepad. And this is just going to be a fairly basic overview. But essentially with networking, you have your device, which is connected via an Ethernet cable to a switch, maybe a router, which then moderates between your connection and the internet. And essentially, you're on one network, you're on a local network, and the router is between you and the internet, and the router translates data for you. So you're probably familiar with IP addresses, so you've probably seen something like 192.168.1.5, and that might be your computer's IP. These IP addresses go from 0 to 255, so you could go from 0.0.0.0, which is totally illegitimate, and you can't do that, to 255.255.255.0 and .255. And this is called the broadcast address. I believe what happens when you send to this address is it goes to all the computers on the network. Now, the reason it goes from 0 to 255 is because this is binary. So essentially, you have 8 binary digits for each of these chunks of numbers. So you have 1111, 1111, dot this, dot this. I'm missing a 1. And essentially, if you do the binary math, it turns out that this is the same as 255, 255, 255, 255. The subnet mask is basically you're using binary bits to get rid of part of the address so that you can differentiate it between the network address or the designation for the network and the designation for your computer. So the normal subnet mask is 255.255.255.0, which basically is this. And it turns out that this is just masking the first 3 chunks of the IP address. So if I have an IP address that's 192.168.1.5, this subnet mask means that 192.168.1, this is the network address or the network designation, and .5 is for my computer. Now, there's also something called IP version 6, but you probably won't run into that as much yet. The other thing about addressing is, so an IP address is really computer friendly. So it can vary depending on, what address is assigned to your computer. But in reality, every computer has something called a MAC address. And that's something that's completely unique to your hardware. So basically, your computer's Wi-Fi adapter has one MAC address. Its LAN adapter or hardwired network adapter has a different MAC address, and it's different from every other computer in the world and every phone in the world. Everything's completely unique. The problem with MAC addresses is that they can be a bit hard to remember. So the idea behind an IP address is it makes it easier to keep track of computer addresses on a network. For the computer's purposes, a router or your computer's network card is going to translate this IP address into a MAC address, and that's really how your computer's communicating. But it's not how you're communicating. The other thing is there's a third kind of address called a DNS address. So basically there's a MAC address, IP address, and DNS. DNS stands for domain name system, and that's what you do in a web browser. So if I go to www.umbc.edu, this is the DNS address of UMBC, of their website. There's also the IP address, which I don't know, and I could probably figure out. I could also enter that into the address bar, and it would take me there. But DNS is a lot nicer, which is why we use it. So basically, when you're doing networking on your computer, the DNS address resolves to an IP address, and then in the background, your computer translates the IP address into the MAC address, which is specific to your computer. And from there, it communicates with the other devices on the network. The DNS address is basically divided into chunks. So .edu is a top-level domain, UMBC is the domain, and www is the server name. So that basically that means there's actually a server somewhere, theoretically, that's called www, and that's the server that's hosting this website. So basically, with the addressing out of the way, the next thing that happens is whenever your computer is communicating on a network, it's sending information in really tiny chunks. Those chunks are called packets. And there are different kinds of packets. There are TCP packets, and there are UDP packets. And there are also many other kinds of packets, but those are the main ones you'll run into. And the difference between TCP and UDP is that TCP packets run error checking to make sure that you haven't lost any data. And if you've lost data, the packet needs to be resent. With UDP, it doesn't work that way. And that's why UDP packets are used for video streaming, because basically you don't want to have any interruption in your content flow, and it's fine if you lose a really infinitesimal amount of data along the way. For anything important like file transfer, you're going to want to be using something more like TCP, where you're actually verifying that the data came through okay. There's a cool utility called Wireshark that you can use to look at data packets. And I'm going to pull that up. You can download it and install it on your computer if you want to. So I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to start capturing okay, it's not working for some reason. I haven't run it on this computer yet, and I just downloaded a portable install. But basically, with Wireshark, it displays every packet that your device is receiving or sending, and you can inspect it if you want to. It looks like a bunch of garbage, unless you know what you're doing. So the other thing about networks is that you should know about is the hardware. So basically, there's generally a router on every network, and the router goes between you and the internet. There might also be a switch. A switch is essentially like a hub that a bunch of computers can connect to, and it just lets you transmit data. It doesn't do anything smarter than that. A router generally hands out IP addresses to computers. That's actually called DHCP, which means Dynamic Host Something Protocol. DHCP is what manages handing out IP addresses. And a router does DHCP, and it does other stuff too, like it does DNS, so it gives your computer a DNS name if it wants one. You may have given your computer a friendly name at some point. That's what DNS is going to look for. The other thing that routers tend to do is they have something called a firewall on them. And the basic idea behind a firewall is that it will let traffic that originates from inside the network pass through. But if the traffic originates from outside the network, it will block it. So if somebody from outside tries to connect to UMBC, the firewall is going to say, no, you can't do that. But if I'm inside UMBC and I'm trying to visit a website that's outside of UMBC, the firewall will let that through, because the request originated from me, it goes out to the internet, and it's coming back. So it won't block that. And a really good firewall will let you inspect the traffic that's coming through it in real time. It'll tell you what it's blocking, what it's not blocking. Every computer is something called Windows Firewall 2, which Windows 10 has messed with the way it looks. Okay, so this lists allowed programs. You can turn Windows Firewall off if you want to, because it's kind of redundant. If you're on a network with a firewall, the problem is if you turn it off, your computer will scream at you. So it's kind of a pain. So you might not want to turn off Windows Firewall. So anytime that you are having trouble with your computer connecting to the network, you want to think about a couple of stuff. One is you want to check your IP address, which you can do by pulling up a command prompt and typing ipconfig. So I can see what network I'm on here, the DNS suffix, if there is one, my IP address, the subnet mask, the gateway, and stuff like that. So if your address looks really weird, then that's something you want to check into. So that's the first thing you want to look at. Another thing you can do is you can say ipconfig/all, and that'll display a little bit of extra information. It'll tell you what DNS server you're using, for example, which you can specify manually if you want to. And you can see that I specified mine manually. So if your DNS servers are whacked out, then something's wrong there. Or if you have no gateway, if that's 0.0.0.0, which you'll see sometimes, that's another hint that something might be wrong. Other things that can cause problems are if you have a bad cable, which doesn't happen very often. Maybe there's a bad port on your switch. Another thing you'll see sometimes is if you do a ping. A ping is a connection test. So let me ping google.com. So it tells me the response time, and my response time is really good. It's basically under 50 milliseconds, which is really what you want. If you're on Wi-Fi, your response time might be a little slower, but basically for anything that involves streaming, you probably want a ping time under 50 milliseconds if you can get it. So if you find that some of your pings are being dropped and it says request timed out, that's a hint that something's wrong with your connection somewhere, probably physically, but that's never certain. Sometimes it's a DNS issue. So if I were to ping some other address like 1.1.1.1, I might get different results because I don't have to go through DNS. And you can see that this response time was actually faster than the original run of pings that I did, probably because there was no DNS resolution involved. So that's all I'm going to talk about in relation to networking for right now. The next thing I'm going to bring up is Device Manager. And I could have talked about this earlier, but I didn't. But this is basically a list of all the hardware on your computer. So you can see that your hard drives are listed on here, and you can see I have 3 of them connected. Your keyboard is listed here. Any printers you have would be listed here, network adapters. So if you want to, you can actually update a driver from here. So I could right-click a device and click Update Driver, or I could go to Properties, go to Driver, Update Driver, or change my driver that way. I can also uninstall a device if I want to, and then whenever I restart my computer, it'll automatically reinstall generally. If you're having trouble with a device, you'll probably see some sort of message here, like you'll see a question mark, and you'll know there's something wrong with it. And at that point, you probably need to install a driver for it. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about is disk partitioning. So this is something that's kind of related to installing Windows. But basically, I've got a list of all my hard drives here. If I go to Disk Management on my computer, and you can see that this disk 1 is partitioned into a couple of different chunks. The main chunk is a 476 gig chunk called Drive C. There are a couple of recovery partitions here as well. So these are going to show up as different volumes on my computer. Now this little 100 meg and 498 meg partition, those are going to be invisible. Windows isn't going to let me see them. But if I wanted to, I could partition one of these other hard drives into smaller chunks if I wanted to, and then it would show up as different drives in my computer. It doesn't really make a lot of sense, so I didn't do that. So I have a 2 terabyte drive and a 1 terabyte drive here, and they're all one partition. But if I wanted to, I could right-click a partition, I could delete it, I could create a new one if I wanted to here. I can do all that inside of Disk Management. So then I'm going to pull up how you do a Windows install. So for this, I'm going to do VirtualBox. So I have a virtual machine here that has Windows installed on it, and I'm going to add the Windows CD so that I can reinstall from scratch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start this machine. And I'm going to press F12 to get my boot device. I'm going to boot to the CD-ROM, so I'll press C for that. And then I press a key to boot from the CD. So what I'm doing here is I'm reinstalling Windows completely from scratch. I'm not using a manufacturer recovery disk. The thing about manufacturer recovery disks is they will probably contain extra garbage software that you don't want. So if you download Windows from Microsoft and install it that way, you're guaranteed to get a clean install. So the installation process is actually very simple. You just select your language, your time and currency format, and keyboard, which you probably won't have to change anyway. Click Install Now. Excuse me. So now it's starting setup. Asks me for a product key. In some cases, you don't even have to worry about this. Right now, I'm going to say I don't have a product key. If your copy of Windows came with your computer, you can probably just click I don't have a product key and you'll probably be fine. If it didn't come with your computer, if you built your computer, you'll probably have to enter a product key. This is a Windows 10 Education install that I'm doing. You can get that for free from UMBC. You can just Google it. So I'm going to skip this. I'm going to install Windows 10 Education, which is kind of like Windows 10 Pro in a way. License agreement. So I already have Windows installed in here. I'm going to click Custom because I don't want to upgrade the existing install. I want to wipe the hard drive. So here's my list of partitions. So what I'm going to do here, well, before I do this, I'm going to show you that you can pull up the command prompt if you want to by hitting Shift F10. There's a tool called DiskPart, which is kind of weird and you have to get used to it, but you can do disk partitioning from here. So if you wanted to format a hard drive, you could do it from here. I'm not going to do that right now, though. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete the partitions that exist already. And that'll remove any data that's already on my computer. So I'll delete this partition, delete this partition, and this partition. So now what would happen is, now that I've deleted this stuff from the partition table, if I were to reboot this computer and try to boot it without the Windows installation CD, it's not going to do anything. It's just going to crash. That's because I've wiped the information that tells the computer where data is stored. But it doesn't actually overwrite any data that's on the computer. It can actually be recovered with software later if you want to. But this is just a quick way to clean it out. I don't even have to make a new partition at this point. I can just click Next and start installing. So I'm going to let it run. It's not going to take very long. And while it's running, I'm going to show you how to download Windows. So what you do is you pull up a web browser and you search for Windows 10 Media Creation Tool. And click on the first link and you can download this tool, and this will let you download Windows as an ISO, or you can download it to a hard drive or a flash drive if you want to. That's incidentally how I got this installation media. So hopefully this install won't take very long. Just going to let it run. Once it's done this first part that says like 26% and whatever, it's going to reboot not long after that. And at that point, if I had a Windows USB stick, I could pull it out if I wanted to. I wouldn't need the installation media anymore. And of course, if I were doing this on my computer, it would wipe everything that's on it. So you want to be aware of that. It used to be that this would take like maybe 30 minutes or so if you use the CD, but we're past the days of CDs. So if you use a USB stick, installing Windows takes maybe 5 to 10 minutes. And I'm not even using a USB stick. This is a virtual machine on my computer. Oh, and I highly recommend VirtualBox if you want something to run different operating systems on your computer. This is a Linux virtual machine. This is just a demo Windows machine that I'm running on. Okay, so it's going to reboot any minute now. Yep, here we go. So it asks me again if I want to boot from the setup DVD, and I do not, so I'm just going to let that tick away. So at this point, I'm not doing anything with the DVD, so I could eject it if I wanted to, so I'm just going to remove it. And it's out of the drive now. For some really annoying reason, this thing is taking a little while. I'm not sure what the deal is. Does anybody have any questions while we're waiting on this? If you want to, you can type it in the chat. Okay, it looks like it's actually done. Okay, so it's rebooting. All right, here we go. So this is the post-installation setup that it'll ask you to do. It's kind of annoying, I think. It used to be that it wouldn't ask you for all this information, but it does now. And I'm going to show you the recommended settings that I would use if I were doing this on my computer. So obviously I don't need to change my region. Keyboard layout's good. I don't need another keyboard layout. Okay, what's it doing now? Okay, so it's asking me to sign in with my Microsoft account, and I don't feel like doing that. I just want to make a local user account. So the way I do that is I'm going to click on domain join instead. And this is essentially for workplace computers where you're authenticating with a central server. But it's not going to actually make me do that. So I just click on domain join instead. Put my name in and click next. It'll ask me for a password. I'm just going to leave this empty. This is a bad idea, by the way. Actually, I'll say ABCDE will be my password. It's not a good one, but I'm going to delete this virtual machine anyway. So security questions. Unfortunately, I can't skip these, so I have to pick one. And since I'm going to delete my this virtual machine, it doesn't matter what I type here. I could probably clear this out later after I'm done installing if I want to. Okay, so it wants privacy settings. I'm going to turn off speech recognition because I don't need it for this computer. You might need it if you're doing anything with dictation. I'm going to turn off Find My Device. This device isn't mobile. I don't need to do any inking or typing. You definitely want to turn off advertising ID. Location, that will probably be useful. Diagnostic data, it probably doesn't matter, but I'm going to turn it off. Tailored experiences, I'm definitely going to turn this off. So I recommend turning off advertising ID and tailored experiences. Both of these I would not leave turned on. And I'm not going to bother activating Cortana right now. So what it's doing right now, when it says hi and is flashing this blue screen for me, is it's creating my user profile. So it's basically creating my documents, pictures, etc. folders that I'm going to be using. So to copy all this information, it might take a minute or two to do. Hopefully it won't take very long. And again, if you have any questions about what I'm doing, you can put it in the chat. Okay, so it's done now. Okay, so there are a bunch of things I would probably need to do to finish setting this up, but all of these you can kind of figure out as you go. So the stuff it was just copying in the background here, I'll actually show you what it was. So if I go to my C drive and go to users and this user account that I just created, obviously it just created all these folders. It also created a hidden folder. So if I go to view options, then I go to the View tab, and I show hidden files, folders, and drives. You'll see there's other stuff here too, like app data. This is where settings and other information is stored for all your programs. So it was copying all this stuff too, all these folders and what's inside of them. So the one other thing that I thought about that I just forgot to show you is how to manually set networking stuff. So the way you do that is you go to your start menu. You can probably do it in PC settings, but I'll show you the other way. The other way is if you go to and search for network connections. And I click View Network Connections. And it'll list all the adapters I have here. This particular installation only has one, which is Ethernet. So I pull this up by double-clicking on it. It tells me my connectivity status, which is fine. I can click on Properties, and I will double click on Internet Protocol version 4 to change my IP address. So I double click, and here you can see that it's set to pull the IP address automatically, which is fine. I'm going to manually set the DNS server though. I'm going to use 1.1.1.1 for that, and for my backup I'll use 8.8.4.4. That's Google Public DNS. Now, I just cleared that out. Now the reason you might want to do this is for a couple reasons. One is this DNS server might be faster than the automatically configured one, which is probably from your ISP. The other thing is, sometimes depending on what network you're on, if you use the local DNS from that network, it might mess with what websites you can visit. So if you just clear that and set your DNS server manually, you don't have to worry about that. So that's how you do a Windows install. And that's, I think, everything I'm going to go through for tonight. Does anybody have any questions, or should I just wrap this up? I'm going to go ahead and turn this off. Okay, so if nobody has any questions, I'm just going to end this. I might be doing another stream about this later next semester. This was a bit of a trial run. Hopefully you found something that was useful to you. And again, I could have gone into more depth for some of this stuff, but you can see that I already spent like 45 minutes on this, and you would probably get bored really fast. So hopefully this was useful. And again, if you want to know more, you can always just kind of Google around and mess around and figure stuff out on your own. So hopefully everybody has a great winter, and maybe we'll see you around in the spring.